the Japanese archery master tells his student that Zen can only be understood by one who is not tempted to gain, through underhand methods, what the mystical experience withholds from him. In other words, he tells his student that in order to understand Zen, one knows by not knowing it. And this is exactly how I've been feeling in trying to convey my experience doing this trial fellowship to others. For the past 7 months, I've been trying to write about this experience, but spoken and written words do not do it justice, and the experience does not translate. Because I think so much of it has to be experienced. The struggle to happiness cannot be understood just by thinking alone, and is in fact only understood when one attempts not to understand it. So I'll try again for the upteenth time, and forgive me if it sounds very abstract. So in the summer of 2016, my partner for the Travel Fellowship, Florian, and I spent 8 weeks on Pulau Simeulue and Pulau Nias, 2 islands off the coast of North Sumatra, where we dived into intellectual materials, physical activities, journaling, yoga, and meditation. In our original idea, we had been inspired by Thoreau's Walden, but our reading spanned a timeline from ancient Greece, China, and India to the monastic traditions of Europe and 12th century Islamic Spain, and finally to modern thinkers like Rousseau, Nietzsche, and Csikszentmihalyi. If I had to sum up my whole experience in one word, it would be incubator, because it was really the time we spent on these 8 weeks that we were grappling with what it means to be happy through reading, sports, and meditation. As someone who was born and raised in Singapore, I have never spent an extensive periods of time abroad. But what is unique about my connection with this country is that we both saw each other grow up at the same time. Just within the past 22 years, seeing the Esplanade, the Marina Bay Sands, and the Gardens by the Bay, these buildings and landmarks that characterize Singapore's skyline spring from the ground as I did, was really a privilege. I know many people who can say that they grew up in a country, but I don't know many people who can say they grew up with one. Whoever said that a nation can't be built in a lifetime has obviously never been to Singapore. And so, as this city matured, so did I. And this city therefore epitomizes familiarity, comfort, security, all these grounding experiences that make home for many people. But that wasn't good enough for me. I found it confounding that these things that people call home were exactly what repulsed me. I wanted something more. I wanted something that could push my experience, something that could help me see what I wasn't able to before. I wanted to go somewhere that was on the opposite of the tall spires of the CBD. I wanted to be liberated from the sterile metropolis in exchange for somewhere a little more raw and a little less manufactured. And so, together with Florian, we designed a program and applied for the Yale-NUS Travel Fellowship. And we chose to be in isolation and away from urban environments because we were driven by the seeming paradox that Singapore, a city with the highest number of millionaires per capita, where the sun is shining most days, where we have clean, fresh drinking water anytime we want, great infrastructure, and even better leaders, is also home to some of the most depressed people. Something is amiss. Despite the clean, green, sunny facade of Singapore, there lurks something deeper and darker, something that status, money, and accolades cannot buy. And so, using a practice that links Jesus to Gandhi, Sufis to monastic monks, Epicures to Shantideva, we went on a quest to discover what it means to live deliberately in the 21st century, and to see if we can ultimately answer the question, what does happiness mean for the modern man and woman? Of course, there were some readings on this trip that did not quite resonate with me. For example, Lao Tzu in chapter 46 of the Tao Te Ching said that, therefore, if you know that you have enough, you will always be content. But this can't possibly be the case because I, and I'm sure with many other people as well, still feel a general sense of discontentment, even though we have enough, and sometimes in most cases more than enough. Yet, the writings of some other authors became portals into a new depth of my lived experience. Wilderness writer Peter Matthiessen said in his book Snow Leopard that happiness is the courage to accept what is. And his words followed me to an open ocean on a cloudy June afternoon and became my very own interlude or prelude into an incident that happened on Pulau Nias. So on the day we arrived in Nias, it was a Wednesday afternoon. I told Flo that I was going to swim across the bay if he would paddle on the longboard next to me. Now, Lagundu Bay had a very captivating landscape. It was shaped like a horseshoe, and on the left side of the horseshoe, you had Sorake Beach, which is a conglomeration of concrete inns called losmen, and was bustling with a traffic flow of surfers, street vendors, dogs from the children from the villages, dogs, cats, chickens, tourists, and locals. That was where we stayed. On the right side of the bay was a view that was the complete opposite to the hustle and bustle of Sorake Beach. It was pristine, untouched forestry, fringed by a secluded and uninhabited beach. It was completely still, and there was no one there. I always imagine these two sides to be the confrontation of Mother Nature and civilization, and the bit in between was where they met. And so one day, despite grey clouds looming on the horizon, I grabbed my open water swim buoy, goggles, Florian, and his longboard in an attempt to travel to the other side of the bay and back before sunset. According to Google Maps, the straight line distance is approximately 1.4 kilometers. Just as we were about to reach the other side, it started to rain. And the rain couldn't hold up for another 5 minutes. The water in which we were still swimming in started to take a different shape, form, and color, furiously moving in all directions and disorienting whoever was in it. Finally, when we did get to the other side, I was exasperated to find that a reef break welcomed us instead of a sandy bottom beach break where we could just walk straight onto shore. That means that to actually get safely on the other side, we would have to navigate a reef with crevices and ravines that threatened to sprain our ankles. On top of that, Flo was carrying a longboard twice his size under one arm, and with all the wind that was coming our way, it threatened to rock us every step. He borrowed it with the promise of not breaking it, and all of a sudden, the beach that we were so desperately trying to get to seemed so much more idyllic from a distance. Battling the wind felt like we were in a hurricane, and we had to shout over the howling wind to communicate with each other. And the heavy patter of gigantic raindrops fell on Flo's deep-set eyes, and his fringe was billowing in the wind as he gestured for me to lead us to safety in the dense tree foliage, where we would be protected from the torrential winds and cold. After what seemed like an eternity of navigating the reef labyrinth, we stumbled onto the beach. Our plan was to sit for 10 minutes, and then come hell or high water, we were to leave because we were in a race against time and darkness was not our friend. So we sat there for 10 minutes. And I would have stayed longer, but Flo, upon realizing that the risk of swimming in the dark was way too high, he made the call to go back. And so once again, we made our way across the hellish reefs to the edge where the water met the reef. And just as I was about to jump in, my hand reached towards the back of my swimsuit to feel for a piece of rubber. And then it hit me. I turned to Flo, and I shouted above the roaring of the wind. I said, "Flo, I left my goggles on the beach!" And I was so disappointed and I couldn't believe myself because the one thing which I needed to swim back, I lost. Looking into the water, I was petrified. It was dark. I couldn't see. It was completely black. And so Flo said to me calmly, he said, "You just have to swim back without it. I'll paddle slowly next to you on the longboard, and we'll make it back." And so I looked into the water, and I could see just the shadow of two rock boulders and a narrow strip of water in between. I was petrified, but then I just jumped into the ravenous sea. So eyes closed, I decided to time every exhalation at the same time the waves brought me to the surface. And so sometimes I would underestimate the waves and take a deep breath at its peak, at its trough rather than at its peak, thereby gulping down a huge mouth of salty water. I stopped every once in a while to see if Flo was still near, and panicking when I could no longer hear his voice, but he was never far away. He would periodically shout my name to make sure that I could hear him and navigate myself with my eyes closed. My ears were my only guide, and I felt so naked. I thought to myself, at this point, anything could have happened to me, and I would be unable to defend for myself. And for the shortest moment, I was terrorized. And I was so afraid that something dangerous would happen to Flo or to me, and we wouldn't make it back to the other side. But then I also realized that so long as none of it was actually happening to me, it wasn't so productive to think and imagine about all the possible scenarios of how we might die. So I decided to turn the attention to my breath and to how my body was feeling in that moment. How was I kicking? How was I pulling? How does my body feel? How does the raw energy of Mother Nature feel? Does it make me feel dizzy? And these questions helped me to distract myself from my fears. And then I decided to marvel at the absurdity of it all. Crackling thunder, threatening skies, rapacious waves, and two meek human beings amidst the symphonious chaos of Mother Nature. And I lost myself in the grips of time. And just before we knew it, we got back to Sorake Beach, just as the sun had set. I looked up into the sky, and it was turning into a deep velveteen midnight blue. And I took my first few steps on land and turned back to see if the other side of the bay was still visible. All I could see was nothing but darkness. Traversing across Lagundri Bay wasn't just a back and forth of two destinations. It was traversing the boundaries between my inner world and outer world, into myself and into another dimension of my experience that I have never been to before. I experienced in Lagundri Bay what I had only read about in Csikszentmihalyi's writings. In his book, Flow, The Optimum Experience, he talks about how flow-generating experiences are the ones in which you no longer think about what you are doing, but that you become the doing. I could say that swimming across Lagundri Bay that stormy afternoon, I was with flow and in flow. At university, I practiced triathlon, and it's the most painful thing, mostly because I never grew up doing triathlon, let alone competitively, and it takes everything: focus, determination, willpower, and discipline to not be beaten up by the sport. And what is most painful is that I never found a way to get used to the pain. No matter how much I train, every swim session hurts, every trek session hurts, waking up at 5 a.m. to ride the bike hurts, everything hurts. But the funny thing I realized was that the pain is what keeps me coming back. That no matter how much it hurt, I always wanted to be doing it again and again every single day. And so I found something satisfying in being absolutely beaten up by the pain, because the pain for me meant that I was feeling, that I was alive. And that for me was what triathlon embodied. Because as long as I was feeling everything that I was experiencing, that for me was enough. And so this was what I had overlooked in Lagundri Bay, that Lagundri Bay showed me again. It was this sense of being so alive, that the moment was both the first and the last, of fearlessness in the moment, that each and every moment was there as it is. It's not being concerned with what is to come or what has passed, but it was an utter and unquestionable acceptance of the situation as it is. Happiness for me wasn't going to be when I was going to arrive safely on the other side. Happiness for me was each and every breath and stroke I took in the middle of that storm, in the middle of Lagundri Bay, eyes closed. Happiness wasn't going to be the survival of the storm. Happiness is the crackle of thunder, the rumble of lightning, and Flo's voice melted into a dizzying soundscape. Happiness is the storm. All this while, Flo and I had a watch that would beep at 5 random times a day. And each time it beeped, we would have to fill in a questionnaire called the experience sampling method. And this was one of Csikszentmihalyi's methods to capture the feeling of the moment. And so we would answer questions like, how safe do you feel in this environment? Or would you rather be doing something else? Etc. Questions like that to gauge how happy you were in that moment. And twice my watch beeped during the swim, and each time I couldn't put to words how I was feeling. It was so overwhelming. I don't believe that security and happiness are synonymous. Money, status, achievements, and accolades, these are the consumerist and conventional notions of happiness that Singapore buys into. And it's not difficult to see the pursuit of that kind of happiness plastered on shiny office marble floors and crystal windows of the CBD. But I think the things that really give us life, they're not found in the skyscrapers or the banks. They're found within ourselves. What I had hoped for initially was to see if happiness meant a stripping away or if it meant an abundance. But I think I found out that it was neither, that Mathiesen is right. Happiness is the courage to accept what is. It is the courage to surrender to your now, even if it means you're in the middle of a storm and it feels like it's the end of the world. And this was where the lessons in triathlon begin to reveal themselves. That when you're in a lot of pain, sometimes the best way to overcome it is to succumb to your pain. Because that burn in your thighs with every cycle, that gasp of air with every stroke, and that nausea in the pit of your stomach in every stride is a sign that you are alive, that you are feeling it and that you are present. And yes, it hurts, but at least you're feeling it. And pain tells me that I'm in the here and now. Pain tells me to honor my body, and pain tells me that I'm alive. And this is really the most beautiful and contradictory discovery that I've made with triathlon. And swimming across the Gundry Bay was a lesson in how to relish and embrace everything as it is. The pain, the fatigue, and the beauty of it all. I would just like to add one last thing I learned swimming across the Gundry Bay. Yes, it takes courage to accept what is, because that means having the courage to confront the moment and therefore to confront the truth. But above all, being in the moment is having faith. It is having a deep faith in yourself that you will finish, that you can continue, and that everything is going to be okay. It is having faith that you won't give up, even if that's what you feel like doing right in that moment. And it is having more than the courage to continue. It is having faith that the metaphorical and literal choppy waters and thundering skies of life are transient. They will pass, and they are not forever. Happiness is exactly what the Zen master means when he says, to yield without resistance. The only time where anything ever matters is now. And I hope you remember that, just as I remind myself every day to let go of myself, to surrender to my now, and to let the present to simply just be. Thank you.